Why do racists always feel the need to speak about the Black American experience? Why do Black people live rent-free in their heads? There isn't a single explanation that applies to all racist people, but social psychology, history, and politics offer some common patterns. Many forms of racism involve an obsession with the group being targeted. That can seem paradoxical. If someone claims to dislike a group, why spend so much time talking about them? Several dynamics can be at work. Maintaining a social hierarchy. Throughout U.S. history, Black Americans have occupied a central place in debates about power, citizenship, voting rights, education, housing, and economic opportunity. People who consciously or unconsciously believe in racial hierarchy often focus on Black Americans because they see challenges to that hierarchy as a threat to their status or worldview. Scapegoating. When people are frustrated by economic, social, or cultural changes, they sometimes look for a group to blame. Scapegoating allows individuals to avoid confronting more complex causes of problems, such as economic policy, corporate decisions, or broader social changes. Identity politics and group identity. Some people define their own identity partly in opposition to another group. In that framework, discussions about Black Americans become less about Black people themselves and more about how the speaker sees themselves and their place in society. Historical centrality. The Black American experience is deeply intertwined with major U.S. events: slavery, the Civil War, Reconstruction, segregation, the civil rights movement, voting rights struggles, and contemporary debates over policing and inequality. Because of that history, race, and specifically Black Americans, remains a recurring focus in American public discourse. Media and political incentives. Controversial racial topics generate attention, clicks, votes, and engagement. Some media personalities, influencers, and politicians repeatedly discuss Black Americans because it energizes their audiences, whether the discussion is positive, negative, or inflammatory. As for the phrase, living rent-free in their heads, many Black Americans use that expression to describe the way some racists appear preoccupied with Black people, even when Black people are not directly involved in the topic at hand. From that perspective, the fixation can look less like genuine concern and more like an ongoing preoccupation rooted in fear, resentment, competition, stereotypes, or anxiety about social change. It's also worth distinguishing between people who discuss the Black American experience in good faith, even when they disagree on policy. People who use Black Americans as a symbol, stereotype, or political target rather than engaging with the realities of Black lives and experiences. Those are very different behaviors, and conflating them can make productive conversation harder. If you're asking specifically about why some people who are not Black speak authoritatively about the Black American experience while dismissing what Black Americans themselves say, that's a related but somewhat different question involving assumptions about expertise, lived experience, and whose voices are considered credible in public discourse. If you're asking specifically about why some people who are not Black speak authoritatively about the Black American experience while dismissing what Black Americans themselves say, that's a related but somewhat different question involving assumptions about expertise, lived experience, and whose voices are considered credible in public discourse. That question gets into the distinction between knowledge about a group and lived experience within a group. Anyone can study the Black American experience. Historians, sociologists, economists, journalists, and ordinary citizens of any race can learn about segregation, redlining, employment discrimination, wealth gaps, voting rights struggles, cultural contributions, and contemporary social issues. Knowledge is not restricted by race. The tension often arises when someone who has never lived that experience speaks over Black Americans rather than with them. For example, imagine someone saying, "Racism isn't a major factor in Black communities today. Black people don't really experience discrimination. The civil rights movement solved those problems decades ago." If Black Americans then describe personal experiences or point to data showing ongoing disparities, and those accounts are dismissed outright, the issue becomes less about evidence and more about whose perspective is being treated as legitimate. In many discussions, Black Americans are not arguing that only Black people can have opinions. Rather, they are questioning why some people assume they understand Black experiences better than the people who actually live them. This dynamic isn't unique to race. Similar tensions arise when men speak authoritatively about women's experiences while dismissing women. Wealthy people explain poverty while ignoring poor people's perspectives. Citizens explain immigrant experiences while disregarding immigrants themselves. Lived experience is not the same thing as expertise, but it is a form of evidence. It provides information that statistics alone often cannot. There is also a historical context in the United States. For centuries, Black Americans were frequently spoken about in public debates while being excluded from positions of power where they could speak for themselves. That legacy contributes to why many people react strongly when contemporary discussions seem to repeat the pattern. At the same time, lived experience is not infallible. One person's experience does not represent all Black Americans. The strongest discussions usually combine personal experiences, historical context, empirical evidence, and a willingness to listen to people directly affected by the issue. The frustration many Black Americans express is often not that non-Black people are participating in the conversation. It is that some participants enter the conversation with fixed conclusions and treat Black voices as less credible than their own assumptions. When that happens, the discussion stops being an exchange of perspectives and becomes a dismissal of the very people whose experiences are being debated.